we tend to communicate in the way that we would like to be communicated to. So as an example, if I'm speaking to you, my tendency is to speak to you in the way that I would like to be spoken to, which works perfectly if you're wired exactly the same way as me. And you're statistically likely not. So the idea is, instead of speaking in a way that's comfortable for me, I need to learn to speak in a way that works for you, and for you, and you, and you. Everyone here, we have to have a language that works for all of them. So really, this is a mental dialect that works for everyone. So in order to do that, let me take you through the 4 neurological preferences. And I want you to keep something in mind. Most people have 2 or 3 out of the 4 preferences. So it's fairly rare. Less than 10% of the general population have just one preference. Some of you may remember, that's me. I just have one preference. I'm a unimodal conceptual thinker. And that was the reason why I struggled so much with communication. A lot of you will remember from my own stories that having a single preference, especially something like conceptual thinking, is not an advantage when it comes to communication. So most of you likely have 2 or 3, which of course balances that a little bit better. And less than 1% of the general population have all 4, quadmodal thinking. Now that makes it challenging as well. As you can imagine, anyone who's listening and potentially thinks they have 4 neurological preferences, it's almost like having a committee in your brain. So a quadmodal thinker listening to someone speak is able to hear things and see things from so many perspectives that at times it feels neurologically overwhelming. So, difference between an ability and a preference. An ability is something that you learn. You're trained in it. You learn it on the job. You go to university for it. And you develop it over your lifetime. A preference is different. It's hardwired. There's a caveat to this. And we were just having a discussion, a few of us, before we launched into this, of the difficulty of assessing someone other than yourself. So we were actually trying to assess a colleague, and it turned out that it was incredibly difficult to do. Why? It's almost impossible for an external observer to assess the difference between an ability and a preference. They look the same to us. The only way to tell is internal. You can feel the difference. So as I'm going through this again, keep this in mind. You will probably be able to identify yourself. It is statistically quite unlikely you'll be able to figure out other people. First of the 4 preferences, analytical thinking. This is a rational thinking preference, one that is driven by a desire for data, evidence, and proof, and they're very good at taking this and bringing it down to a rational conclusion. The most obvious example is that analytical thinkers will often disengage if they do not receive adequate data, evidence, and proof. So they start to lose interest. They'll start to disengage from your presentation or talk. And if there is information that conflicts or rationally doesn't make sense, they'll often interrupt you or ask for clarification. We need to make sure that we address analytical thinkers in the body. This is where the data, evidence, and proof is. So when we're speaking, we need to make sure, introduction, body, conclusion, that we're referencing analytical thinkers in the middle. And we give them enough information. And enough information for an analytical thinker is a lot of information. So this is where you need to give them follow-up resources or links to white papers or research. This is where a pre-read or a link to SharePoint or whatever it is really good for giving analytical thinkers as much access to this data, evidence, and proof as possible. Now, I referenced that they're not included in the introduction and they're not included in the conclusion. Why is this? Because neurologically they're not interested in it. So we need to recognize that when we're speaking to analytical thinkers, let's expect them to disengage in areas that don't suit their brain. Let's not seek validation during an introduction. Why is 25% of the room not paying attention during your introduction? Likely because they have an analytical thinking preference. They're waiting for you to get to the body. So part of the premise of this in presenting with influence is to understand that we do not seek validation from the audience. Instead, the validation comes through cognitive science and knowledge, rather than looking for people's reactions. It's interesting that we've been trained so much to look at the audience and expect people to be smiling and nodding and acknowledging us. And sometimes that will happen, but not all the time. So the idea is, for example, in a virtual meeting, when you can't see, if no one's on video, can you still have the confidence to structure your communication in a way that works for them without getting that validation? That's where science and research is very helpful to us. Another preference, 2 of 4, structural thinking. This is another rational thinking preference, and the idea behind this is people who are very good at organizing information into a sequence and order. Now, You may have guessed where I'm going with this. What does that mean? We need to give them sequence and order. So it sounds so obvious in hindsight, but for a lot of us who don't have a structural thinking preference, this is actually quite illuminating to recognize that we need to provide explicit sequence when we speak. So as an example, when you're doing a presentation, it could be a high-level sequence, something as simple as, today I'm going to be talking about 3 main things. A structural thinker is like, thank you, I can follow this, as long as you follow those 3 things. Because what happens to a lot of us is, due to anxiety or excitement, we sometimes break our own sequence and structure. So if you say you're going to talk about 3 things, you need to talk about 3 things. If you say you're going to be talking for 20 minutes, you need to talk for 20 minutes. Not 22, not 21, 20. Now you can go less, you just can't go more. So the idea is time and sequence and order are incredibly important. If you provide sequence and order to structural thinkers, their brains can relax. When someone is neurologically comfortable, they are much more open to influence and input. We make people receptive to new ideas. And the way that we do that is by making them neurologically comfortable. This is not manipulation. This is making people incredibly comfortable inside their brain so they are open to receiving new ideas or data or information. This is where it gets very exciting to realize that we can create environments that work for people's brains. Conceptual thinking. This is the first of the intuitive thinking preferences. You may remember that this is my go-to. This is my dominant neurological preference. I know a lot about this because this is how my brain functions. The idea is that conceptual thinkers are not very good at listening to things in their entirety. They're very good at picking up fragments that resonate with them. My tendency is to get very excited about pieces, fragments, and I put them together in my brain into what I refer to as intuitive conclusions. So what does this mean? It means that it makes them creative. It means that it makes them also pretty poor listeners. I know that. I'm not described as a great listener a lot of the time because I get excited about little things that get me excited rather than the overall picture or the details itself. So what does this mean when we're presenting to conceptual thinkers, who, by the way, represent a quarter of the general population? This means that we need to give them something neurologically to hang on to. And again, if we look at this structure, introduction, body, conclusion, you'll remember we referenced them very clearly in the introduction. What is it that a conceptual thinker needs from you? The big idea, the point, the conclusion. I always joke that if you take a book and you hand it to a conceptual thinker, the way they'll often read it is by flipping to the end. They're just looking for the conclusion. They're like, And then if you ask them to read it, they're like, oh yeah, Oh no, there we go. They're looking for pieces that resonate with them. And the idea behind this is that if we can give them something neurologically to hang on to, they can process this and play with this while you're going through the data, evidence, and proof. But we also have to remember that they're not entirely listening to you during the body. They're just processing it. So with conceptual thinkers, we need to recognize there's a moment in the communication that's key for them. It needs to be done very well, that concise, powerful conclusion. And then we basically leave them alone. Now, this is the idea of cognitive diversity, creating environments in which people can listen in a way that suits them. Can we be confident enough as presenters to leave people alone while we're speaking and let them ruminate and think and process information in a way that's comfortable for them? If we can create environments like this, this is where audiences start developing authentic connection with us rather than feeling forced. And this is key to creating environments of collaboration and inclusivity as well. Last one, social thinking. Social thinkers, I feel, are very misunderstood. It's often incorrectly associated to gender. It was often described as a female or feminine thinking trait, which is not true at all. There is no statistical difference between the number of men and women who have a social thinking preference, but it's often socialized as something that is attributed to women, which is too bad. Because what it means is we are losing out on social thinking in a lot of our communication. Social thinkers, a quarter of the general population, are people who are very good at connecting ideas to people. When they're listening to you, they automatically start connecting this to themselves and the people around them. So they're listening to you speak, and they start going, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for the people around me? What does this mean for my team or the organization as a whole? So how do we connect with social thinkers? In my research, this was probably my most challenging work, trying to figure out how to connect with highly intuitive thinkers. And it turns out that language is key to this. Inclusive language is very good for connecting with social thinkers. Inclusive language is words like we, you, all of you sitting here today, many of you. And you may have noticed I tried to use that even in the introduction to this session here today. I'm creating social connection through language. And if you do that, social thinkers are very good listeners. If you create connection or common ground, and then you're able to actually deliver that in an authentic way, they're very good at staying engaged, listening, doing what some of you are doing right now, nodding, smiling, commenting. Not only that, here's where it gets very interesting from the perspective of influence. If you establish genuine connection with a social thinker, not only do they listen during the communication itself, they will often do something afterwards. They will take it with them. They'll advocate for you. So if you want a change management initiative to go across an organization, or you want an idea to take hold, I believe one of the keys to attaining widespread influence is connecting with social thinkers. So they will often take your idea and introduce it to other people. And they're often very good at establishing networks with other people in which they can take an idea and make it go forward. So in a corporate environment, the idea here is that it's very difficult for an idea to take hold without connecting it with social thinkers. Right. So what does this mean? This means we put together a jigsaw puzzle in which we're addressing every single neurological preference. So let's have a look at this. If you look at introduction, body, conclusion, you may have noticed we're addressing every single neurological preference every single time we speak. We're not trying to figure out our audience. We're not trying to guess what someone's preference is. No matter if I'm speaking to one person or 4 or 400, the idea here is we give people everything and it works every single time. Now, this does a few things. Number one, it guarantees that you're going to be connecting with the entirety of your audience. And for me, and for many of the people I work with, I believe it also gives us a lot of confidence. This is where I believe confidence comes from. The recognition that if we understand what our audience needs from us, it also helps us to develop that confidence that we're reaching and connecting with our audience. Now, we can combine this with some ideas around delivery. You may have noticed in the session, and in this follow-up session here, that I've spent most of the time talking about cognitive science and neurological sequence and order. Why? Because it's everything. Without neurological sequence and order, what I'm going to be talking about next doesn't necessarily work. The idea is first, the most important thing is neurological sequence and order. If you do that well, you can get away with an awful lot. You don't need to be a perfect presenter. But these next ideas that I'm just going to touch upon briefly to give you some guidance on your presenting are very useful for combining with the idea of neurological sequence. The idea here is when it comes to nonverbal communication, there's a lot of information out there, a lot of it that's very misleading, if not incorrect. My research has indicated that there are really 2 things that you can focus on that have very powerful effects in the way that you deliver your communication. Now, you can read a whole bunch of books about this, or you can just do these 2 things. And it comes down to something very simple. I'll explain to you why I think this works. It's simply about slowing down and speaking up. Now, if you do those 2 things, a lot of remarkable things are attached to this. The idea of slowing down does very interesting things both internally and externally. Now, I've had to focus on this a lot. I'm naturally a very quick talker. A lot of you know I get very excited about a lot of things, so I tend to speak very quickly. But I force myself to slow down. Why? First, it helps me to relax. When I slow down my rate of word delivery, I tend to relax. It's like a way of actually just forcing myself to sort of slow down. It's also much easier for me to speak more clearly. You may have noticed, and I'm speaking without notes here, that it's not that often I stumble over my words. I do every so often, but not that often. Why? Because I'm speaking slowly enough that I can actually plan out my next sentence. So the idea here is it's almost impossible to speak too slowly. Almost all of us speak too quickly. Our brains are terrible at modulating pace and volume. So for almost all of us, speak as slowly as you possibly can when you're presenting, and it'll turn out to be the right pace. The same applies to actually speaking up. Almost all of us speak too softly. And the idea behind this is, by projecting our voice, interesting things happen when it comes to nonverbal communication, body language. You can study body language for 10 years, and you can go to classes for it, or just speak up. Because when you speak up, you may notice interesting things happen. It's very difficult not to be expressive with both your face and your body when you're projecting your voice. So instead of planning out your gestures, instead focus on projecting your voice. And a lot of interest starts to get inflected into your vocal delivery as well. You may have noticed that when you project your voice, you get intonation and change because it's virtually impossible to speak in a monotone when you're projecting your voice. The idea behind this is when it comes to presenting, we're trying to use cognitive science and ideas about nonverbal communication to get to the place where we like the way we look and sound. We are being perceived for the way that we want to be seen. And this is the idea behind presenting with influence. The idea is if we can combine the idea of cognitive science with an authentic delivery style, suddenly we're reaching a place in which not only do we feel comfortable, but our audience feels comfortable with us. Their brain is relaxed. They're receptive to information. They see someone who's confident and relaxed and at ease, combined with clarity of thinking. And it's pretty rare to see that. When you see someone doing that, that is a moment in which you are very open. Now, remember, influence is very difficult to achieve. Trying to achieve influence, even under perfect conditions, is incredibly challenging. Perfect conditions are a group of people who have a similar background or outlook or mindset to you, and you're trying to convince them of something that's not that different of something they already believe. Even that's challenging to do. Try doing it when you're connecting with an audience you've never met before, and you're trying to portray or project or present an idea that people are not receptive to. Suddenly, you need every possible advantage you have, and that's why we need to rely on cognitive science and these techniques in order to create an environment where we're giving ourselves as many advantages as possible.